Hello. Thank you very much for the acceptance of my paper for the third International Virtual Conference on Education, Social Sciences and Technology 2023. Let me start with my presentation on my paper submission, which is titled on Effectiveness of Special Economic Zones as a Strategy for Economic Development in Sri Lanka. My name is Baratha Dewanarayana and I am representing School of Business of National Institute of Business Management, Sri Lanka. This study was basically focused on four objectives as to explore the evolution of special economic zones in the Asian region, and to identify the role of special economic zones in Sri Lanka, to investigate the challenges for attracting FDIs for special economic zones in Sri Lanka, and finally to identify prospects of attracting FDIs for special economic zones in Sri Lanka. Talking about special economic zones, so we can refer the definition by Thomas and Gohan in 2011. According to them, special economic zone is a special geographical boundary within the national boundaries of a given country, which has been located in the given country, but basically set for the purpose of reaching certain economic prosperities such as foreign direct investments, tourists, foreign exchange, foreign employment, and increase of GDP. And this particular geographical boundaries therefore is governed and regulated with special set of rules and regulations with the purpose of attracting investors from local as well as the global environment. Special economic zones are also known, or rather the scope of special economic zones cover the following aspects, the following segments as well. So sometimes you might see export processing zones, free trade zones, technological innovative zones, industrial production zones, tourism recreational zones, or the port zones are basically special economic zones all over the world. And here you can see some of the development objectives of the selected zones, economic zones, and basically which markets that they are focusing on. Now if you take free trade zones, basically it is basically for the purpose of supporting the trade, and of course for the domestic market and for the re-export market. Traditional export processing zones are basically for the export manufacturing and looking at the export aspects. And sometimes we find say free enterprises, single unit special or other export processing zones are basically for the export manufacturing and therefore focusing on export market. And sometimes there are hybrid special or other export processing zones, once again focusing on the manufacturing, export manufacturing, and therefore they are looking at both export and domestic markets. Sometimes there are some examples from the Thailand aspects as well. And then we have free port special economic zones, that is for the integrated development, which we have kind of multi-use or multiple activities or the focusing on both internal and export markets. There are such kind of zones as well in the world to reach such multi-purpose or the multiple activities. Talking about the evolution of special economic zones in the world, according to Douglas Z. Zen in 2021, mentioned that special economic zones were established in the form of export processing zones, EPZ, in the initial stage, and then the modern and converted into modern industrial zones, especially in Shannon Island in 1959. So thereafter, East Asia and Latin America launched the same, the strategy somewhere in 1970s, where India and Philippines also started the same in 1960s and 1960 and 1965 respectively. Now talking about the present aspect of the special economic zones and its distribution in the world, China has become the land for more than half of special economic zones all over the world. Whereas India, United States, and Philippines, they are being counted for the next highest special economic zones in the world. So yeah. And then talking about the Asian aspects, as I mentioned earlier, so the Asian aspects, the initial case is reported in 1960s in Philippines, and thereafter in India in 1965 as in the form of export processing zones. And that is, I mean, Indian case would be the first experience in the South Asian region, and recently positioned 231 special economic zones with the purpose of positioning ICT in the manufacturing and service sector in India. So India has developed it throughout the last couple of decades. And Taiwan, earlier as a part of a province of China, they also started this in early, as in the form of export processing zones somewhere in 1970s. And of course, the Republic of Korea also launched this strategy in late 1970s for the purpose of gaining economic prosperity. And here you see what I mentioned earlier. This diagram witnessed the ownership of special economic zones, where you can see the highest is from China, which is around 2000 plus, and likewise Philippines, India, Turkey. Likewise, you can see how it has been graded or the listed, and this is basically for the Asian region as well. Then that is why the United States have not been taken into this particular diagram. Now coming back to the main focus of the study, which is the Sri Lankan case of special economic zones and attracting FDIs for the development of special economic zones as a strategy to develop the Sri Lanka, or the strategic development tool. Say Sri Lanka had this wonderful opportunity, and officially launched it in 1978, where they launched the economic kind of processing zones, or rather export processing zones, basically with the trade liberalization. And this is basically for the purpose of attracting foreign direct investments, FDIs, and to promote the export composition or export income in Sri Lanka for the purpose of growing the GDP in Sri Lanka. To support this, there was another official establishment was initiated, or rather made, that was Greater Colombo Economic Commission, that was initiated in 1978 for the purpose of strengthening the promotion of investments with the unmatchable incentive packages provided in the region by the time. Now furthermore, about the Sri Lankan aspects, where the export processing zones, or economic processing zones rather, where the first free trade zone for the export purpose was initiated in 1978 at Katunayake, and then Biyagama in 1982, and Koggala followed by Koggala, or the third one is in Koggala, which is in the down south, in 1991. So the Katunayake one is 1978 was initiated, and which was highly been backed by some other reasons, where the international airport in Sri Lanka is located in Katunayake, where it was a plus, or a strong point for Sri Lanka to initiate its first free trade zone in Katunayake, where, because by the time the infrastructure facility was developed to the certain level, so Katunayake was one of the wonderful locations for Sri Lanka to promote it. That is in the western province in Sri Lanka, and also the Biyagama, which is also located very close to Colombo, a couple of kilometers away from Colombo, which is in Biyagama, and Koggala, is in the southern province in Sri Lanka. And thereafter Hambantota, which is once again the southern part of Sri Lanka, Mirigama, which is very close to the western province in Sri Lanka, Pallekele, which is in upcountry, Sitawaka and Vatupitiwala zones were also opened thereafter. These are the different locations in Sri Lanka which thereafter started the free trade zones for the purpose of promoting its export composition while contributing the same towards economic growth. And investment guide 2022 Sri Lanka, that is being by the Board of Investment Sri Lanka, they say that there are 15 economic zones were initiated in Sri Lanka, and there are about 271 companies approximately employing or rather utilizing 129,500 employees for the moment, and which is approximately contributing 3 billion to the annual export income in Sri Lanka, where the Eravur and Hambantota, another two more economic zones, are expected to be commenced, especially in the field of pharmaceuticals and textile industries. So there are certain investments for the moment, and they are having at the discussion level. This is the breakdown of the special economic zones or the industrial parks in Sri Lanka, with the land extent and the number of enterprises being launched or functioning there for the commercial purposes. And talking about the FDIs in Sri Lanka, so this is the major case, whereas now from 2010 to 2019, you can see that the maximum or the highest FDIs were attracted to Sri Lanka. That was in 2018, which is very close to 2.3 billion US dollars. So where you all can see that Sri Lanka is kind of struggling to attract more FDIs, whereas their maximum is reported as 2.3 billion. So that is why basically this research was focusing on as how the special economic zones can use as a strategy to promote FDIs as a tool of developing the Sri Lankan economy, right? And of course, with the data that has been observed, it is very clear that Sri Lanka is facing a couple of challenges to overcome in order to attract FDIs to promote special economic zones in Sri Lanka. So the number one is that I mean, this has been highly visualized, the challenges what Sri Lanka has for the moment. So there's a significant difference between approved projects and the contacted projects, or I mean approved project versus contacted projects towards BOI, Board of Investments. So there's a huge difference. Though they have been contacted, the approved projects show kind of a significance gap as approved, as in the form of approval, whether the approval has been granted or not. And in addition to that, why such a gap? Number one is that delays in approval for land. There are delays that we need to overcome. And of course, when it's come to ease of doing business index also, where Sri Lanka has many more areas to improve in terms of the economic stability, in terms of political stability, forex rate stability. Likewise, they are having many areas to further develop as a challenge. And then the investment policy that the country is having, and the modifications and the developments are needed to attract more FDIs to Sri Lanka. And of course, compared to the others in the region, where Sri Lanka also need to come up with very attractive incentive packages to attract foreign investors, to enhance the sustainability of special economic zones in Sri Lanka. Plus, during the last couple of years, it was completely, it was very transparently reflected that energy is one of the issues in Sri Lanka, because now Sri Lanka is now working on providing continuous energy to its population. It is happening right now. In addition, to attract investors, we need energy, plus providing energy at relatively lower cost is also important, where now the energy prices are a little bit higher in Sri Lanka. So therefore, those challenges are to be overcome in order to attract FDIs to promote special economic zones as a development strategy in Sri Lanka. Apart from the challenges, Sri Lanka is indicating many more prospects, many more potentials to attract FDIs to promote special economic zones. This unparalleled strategic location, being an island, being located in the marine flow, and of course the location in Indian Ocean basically has become strategic advantage, or a locational comparative advantage for Sri Lanka to promote it, based on the natural ports they have, based on the airports they have. It's a nice location within which the Sri Lanka can promote more of their FDIs. However, the labor force, of course, having a higher literacy, well educated, where the literacy rate is having 92.6, around approximately 92.6, and of course the adaptive labor force, well educated. So I believe this as a second potential prospect for Sri Lanka to promote FDIs in the region. In addition to that, once again, the unparalleled, unmatchable, the natural resource ownership or the endowment is one of the key comparative advantages for Sri Lanka, because the land of Sri Lanka and the availability of natural resources which is required for the production, especially for the manufacturing industry, that is obviously available here in Sri Lanka. And of course, emerging markets and the accessibility towards markets from the Sri Lankan, the land itself to other markets in the world is another advantage, another potential prospect for Sri Lanka to use in order to attract FDIs towards it. And of course, yes, the board of investments, their approval threshold, kind of say their regulations, and their kind of the protection being given, their monitoring and their facilitation is another key potential prospect for Sri Lanka to use to attract FDIs. And finally, Sri Lanka is currently promoting one of their largest special economic zones, started in 2018 onwards, which is the port city Colombo. Of course, now port city is basically being located in Colombo, next to Gold Face, and focusing or targeting the next financial city in the South Asian region. Not only that, there'll be many more extras, there'll be many more facilities available for, especially for foreigners to come and invest over there. And I believe the port city project in Sri Lanka will further bring FDIs to promote the economic prosperity of Sri Lanka. So the port city Colombo project is currently, or the presently is happening, ongoing project, where Sri Lanka is expecting to generate many more economic advantages by achieving the investment targets at the port city. So those are the main concerns that I really wanted to focus on. Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity, and I wish you all the very best for iWest 2023. Thank you very much.